Thank you so much for having us. And thank you to the organizers. It's such an honor to be here with two thinkers I admire and to celebrate the legacy of Pope Francis and his faith in literature. I think our panel is, we've been dispatched, I think, to ask literature to justify that faith a little bit. Before we delve into our conversation, we're going to hear from both of our speakers. Maybe Zaidi, you'll start us off with a few reflections.
Hi, oh, there you go. I was going to start with thinking for a second about Simone Weil. For the past few years, I've been reading about her with the idea of writing a novel about her. A great ethical thinker, a socialist, and of course a Catholic. And there's an essay that I read pretty much once a year called Human Personality. I'm sure some of you know it, in which Simone thinks about what an afflicted person would cry in their affliction. So not a person suffering from a microaggression, not a person who is offended, but a truly afflicted person. And she says that one of the options is, you have no right to do this to me. And she's interested in that sentence because she thinks it comes from a place of the discourse of rights. And she locates that discourse in Roman property law. And you're going to have to excuse my very bad Latin, but jus utendi et abutendi. So what is yours to use and abuse, essentially. And then that's what the language of rights comes from. And one of the things that language was used for was to defend the use of slavery amongst the Romans. So she is interested in a different language, which is not about your right not to do this to me specifically. She says the correct cry of the afflicted is, what you are doing to me is not just. And that's a very different kind of cry, because it's universal and it belongs to a different language. So I think one of the questions maybe we might discuss today is, where is that language still present? I think there are three places maybe traditionally. One is obviously the language of faith, in which people are in and of themselves sacred because they are God created. Though, as we've seen, that language is often abused. You think of someone like J.D. Vance, who thinks that the sacred human is more sacred depending on how American they may be or how close in kin to him. The second place is the language of human rights, which is formalized after the disaster of the Second World War. And I think that's something else we might think about. What kind of disaster allows people to speak of the human? And then the last place traditionally was literature, in which, in a slightly different mode, the particular is used to express the universal. And I was thinking about myself as a young reader. I spent my entire time in that world, in that belief system. So you could say, I too am Madame Bovary, or I too am Leopold Bloom. But of course, the complication of that for a person like me is that you're spending all your time in this universal enjoyably. I always loved to be in that world. But when I came to start writing in my early 20s, the question was, can someone like Perrault or me or Moses, can we also be the universal for that reader? Is it possible that our particularity can also be universal? So that was my project, more or less, when I was 23. And the only thing I want to add to that, what interests me, is that when I started, that project was comprehensible. So I'm a comic novelist, so I write funny novels mainly, but in them, people encounter each other, they make friendships across borders, and when I used to read these novels, because I'm a ham, I do all the voices. I come from a family of actors and performers, and so that's what I used to do. And what I noticed 25 years later, though I still write novels in which people encounter each other, and there are these borders, I don't read that aloud anymore. I don't do all the voices. And why don't I do all the voices? Because the entire discourse around the idea of the particular to universal has changed. So the idea of me doing the voices is the idea of me owning or capturing these voices, or erasing these voices, or believing that they speak through me. So one of the things that has happened maybe in the past 20 years is the submission of literature entirely to the idea of rights. And each novel became, one way or another, an expression of the rights of this particular group, which is not to be dismissed, because in order to get rights out of a democracy, you usually do have to appear as a specific group. But the other language, the language which allowed for the possibility of solidarity across those groups, vanished. And I think the other part of it that Pope Francis is very alert to is the role that technology played in that. That technology offered to us the idea of indexing the entirety of human experience. Specifically, everything was categorized, including human beings. And I think literature responded, almost like the indigenous people when Columbus comes to the beach. It laid down in front of this idea of human indexing. And though there's many extraordinary novels that come out of this period, the question is there a language again for that universal? And I don't think it can be a 19th century language. I don't think there's any point in writing 19th century novels or imagining that form will reoccur. So maybe later we can think of the kind of novels that might find a new foundation for the human without falling into nostalgia or trying to resurrect a human subject which is gone from most people's understanding of the world. Period.
Thank you.
Thank you, Parul. Thank you, Zaidi. Can you hear me? No. But this should work. It's working. I don't know why it's not working. Maybe this one? No. Something is not working. Yeah. Oh, okay. I already talked to you about Pope Francis and what he said. I want to quote again a passage that really struck me of what he said once. In the time of global crisis and war and deep polarization, the rigid paradigms and major climate and economic challenges, we need the brilliance of a new language, powerful stories and images, writers, poets, and artists. So we don't need politicians. We don't need experts in economics. We need powerful stories and images, writers, poets, and artists. So today we are reflecting exactly on this point and on the role literature might play in rebuilding the common good. And it's not a small question. And for me, it starts with a suspicion that literature itself has partly contributed to the problem. Or rather, that at some point it embraced, perhaps even enthusiastically, the logic of the self-sufficient I, the lyricism of the self. So we have shifted from epic, collective narratives to a proliferation of individual stories, often closed within a privatized form of trauma. There is nothing inherently wrong with this shift, because, every I is a microcosm, which is fine. But when the sum of all those I's fails to generate a we the people, then something breaks down. I already quoted before a writer I really like. I like one of the writers I like the most, and I deeply admire, is Raymond Carver, poet and novelist. And he explored the tension between the isolated self and a possible form of communion. His stories and poems present us with people apparently living in the margins, trapped in minimal lives, marked by hardship, alcoholism, separation, and a quiet sense of failure. But just beneath the surface, in every minimalistic sentence, in every precise gesture, there lies a thirst for redemption, a deep need for connection. Raymond Carver never idealizes. He writes about trauma not as an identity marker, but as a wound that still opens toward the mystery of the other. So reinterpreted, no? the trauma he lived in his own life. So because sometimes we, even the narrative of war we are reading now, about Ukraine, about Gaza, no? as the trauma as if it is an identity marker, and which is very interesting, but at the same time we should go beyond. So to consider the trauma as a wound. Pope Francis spoke very often about a church which has no fear to be wounded, to go an outgoing church, able to stay along the streets, even to fail. Many times he said, I made a mistake openly. That was pretty, that really struck me. I never heard another pope saying, I made a mistake so openly. But to consider the wound as a window open toward the mystery of the other. Take, for example, cathedral. I don't know if you are familiar with Raymond Carver, but there is a short story which is just amazing, breathtaking, Cathedral. The narrator is a closed, cynical man, incapable of empathy, who ends up hosting a blind man, a friend of his wife. So he was blind. And they had a conversation. He was uncomfortable, suspicious, even irritated. But near the end of the story, something happens. The two of them begin to draw a cathedral together, because the blind man asked him, what is a cathedral? They were in front of the television. There was a show about a program about the medieval cathedral. And so the blind man asked him, what cathedral is? And so the only answer that guy was able to give is to draw a cathedral together with the blind man, hand in hand. So the narrator guiding the blind man's hand, eyes closed. He even closed the eyes, and they draw the cathedral together. The simple, unadorned act becomes an epiphany. For the first time, the man sees, not with his eyes, but through relationship. So there is no explicit lesson, no moral, only the silent emergence of openness, contact, and transformation. It's the shift from a sealed I and an embryonic we, born in a shared gesture. Dante, whom Pope Francis has written about since his time as Jesuit priest, developed a similar theme in the Divine Comedy. A work that represents all humanity in the purification of a single soul, from the chaos of hell, where every damned soul is trapped in egoism, to the vision of paradise as an harmonious city of saints united in God's love. Dante's journey is guided by others and by love, Beatrix, symbol of the grace. And at the end, he discovers that the engine of the universe is love itself. So we live in an age where loneliness has become structural, even though we are more digitally connected than before. So we are together and we are alone together. There's a very famous book about this. So, everything feels close, immediate, clickable, but yet a sense of estrangement grows. It's as if our identities have hardened into separate little bubbles that rarely touch. Filtered bubble. This is another interesting title of a beautiful book. Filtered bubbles. Of course, filtered by algorithms. So here's the question. Can literature, at the time of the algorithm, help us rebuild a shared imagery? Can it give us a common language, or at least a space where languages listen to each other, intermingle, translate? There was a question before about this topic. So the common ground I speak of is not a compromise, but a radical space, a radical center, perhaps, as Zadie might say.
Thank you so much. I don't know what I can add to that, but if I were to, I would say that for me, one of the great gifts of literature is that it can act as a check on certain kinds of fantasy, and certain kinds of fantasy, for example, fantasies of solidarity. You know, so the notion that we can imagine that to enter in a relationship of solidarity might feel good. It might be easy. We might have to sacrifice nothing. We might be loved by the people we enter into common cause with. And I think that the novels and the novelists who are brave enough to keep writing about solidarity and thinking across difference, the Irish novelist Claire Keegan, for example, the Nobel Prize winner Han Kang, Zadie's own novels, they show that it's a much more tricky, intricate, occasionally uncomfortable experience. And I think that some of these novels really slow down and at least show me that to enter into a relationship of solidarity, to really, really make common cause with another person, does demand a feeling of discomfort and the ability to be in a kind of productive discomfort with the self and a lack of certainty about the self, about the borders of the self, the borders of the other person. And only through that, paradoxically, you have this relationship with your own self, only by being with the other. But I wanted to start, I think, by asking why literature is so good at doing this, in helping us think, for example, across difference, but helping us enter into other consciousnesses. I mean, there is an abdication, and we'll talk about why writers may not be doing this with as much sort of intensity and seriousness. But tell me a little bit about, from both of your reading, what fiction can do or poetry can do.
I mean, what really interested me about Pope Francis' depiction of reading is that actually he describes reading like a post-structuralist French philosopher. It was so fascinating to me that he thinks that way or thought that way, because I also agree that the reader is not passive in the act of reading. As you're reading, you are constantly, as he says, rewriting, adjusting, adapting what is being given to you. And I think part of the place where this argument has got very stuck is that the depiction of a reader in some of these kind of anti-empathy discourses, and there's a lot of them in our world at the moment, that even the concept of empathy in literature is a kind of feint and a phony thing to disguise power. In those discourses, the reader is just subject to the novel. Passive. The reader just sits there and is forced to take on the ideas of the novel, the images of the novel, the conceptions of the novel. So to me, those arguments start from a base that I don't agree on. It's a bit like when Rowan Williamson says of the new atheists, I don't believe in that God either. That's how I feel about this picture of the reader. Like, that's not the reader I am or know. I assume that when a reader and writer are together, it is a joint enterprise. And that's the reason when 15 people read a novel, they come out with a different novel each time, because it isn't a unidirectional power grab on the part of the novelist. It's a combination of two people finding meaning together with barriers, right? So the dog is green does not mean the dog is pink. There's the limits of the logic of language. But there's a lot of movement within language, which I think some of these arguments pretend not to know. Suddenly language is just a prison. It only has one meaning. There's no way to go around it. But we know in our daily lives language doesn't function like that. It's not just a system of power. It's also a movable feast.
It's interesting because Pope Francis, in a letter he wrote about literature, said that the reader is a writer. I mean, is the
Exactly.
when you read a novel, you become a writer. So it's like for me, it's like a music. So if it's not played, you have just the sheet of paper. You can hear anything. So you need to perform it in order to understand it. I think that for answering the question, a great novel or a genuine poem doesn't simplify the world, but it complicates it. And it makes the world harder to judge, but easier to inhabit. But it's very important to make the world more complicated because we are used to simplify the world, especially politics now. They tend to simplify everything to be understandable for the people just because they want to manipulate the people, but not because, so we need to complicate the world, the questions. I was struck, and I want to quote it, by what Pope Francis said to the popular movements. So people engaged in popular movements. So social workers, people who are able to work, to spend their life for the common good. And he said, that's what I like to call you, social poet. Poeti sociali in Italian, social poet. I don't know how to translate in English because it's a strange expression in Italian because it means that you are social workers, but because that you are poets. So because you have the ability and courage to create hope, where others only see waste and exclusion. Poetry means creativity, and you create hope. With your hands, you forge the dignity of each person, of families, and of society as a whole, with land, housing, work, care, and community. So he was saying something, for me, fundamental. Humanity, in its raw state, is ruthless. We see it everywhere, from Gaza to Ukraine, but also in the courtyards of our homes. So when we show solidarity, we are artists. Because the world, the human being naturally don't act pushed by piety, not piety, pushed by solidarity, no? A sense of love. So, but when we act with solidarity, improving the common good, there is something creative at work. So we became creative, artists, poets. Pity, compassion, solidarity, these are forms of poetry. And perhaps the reverse is also true. I had a conversation with Patti Smith a couple of months ago. We had breakfast together outside their home in Soho. And so it was a breakfast, but was also kind of an interview in the middle. So at the end, we decided to publish it. We recorded our conversation. And she said, I was very struck by that conversation. She's turning 80.
Oh my gosh.
Next, can you imagine?
Yeah, no.
No, me neither. I mean, next year. But I have to say that Pope Francis 88, Martin Scorsese 82, Patti Smith 80. So we should ask them, all those people. I'm working with an artist who is 92. It has Michelangelo Pistoletto. It's a great exhibition in New York right now. So we should work with old people for getting the meaning of our life. It must be a project, this one. But she said at some point, I want to quote her, we must build a counter-narrative to the dominant rhetoric. We need a new language, not one that paralyzes people with horror, but one that awakens them with imagination. Imagination is revolutionary energy.
I mean, I completely agree, and I think the novelistic approach to the human subject understands that power, for example, is not an identity, it moves. And what you said about trauma identity is part of the problem. If you believe there are eternal victims of history, then you're not ready for when those victims become aggressors. Israel is a perfect point right now. So you need an imagination which allows for that kind of movement. And a lot of the discourses, I think, of the past 15 years have been about the permanent identity of human citizens. And I think if you think that way, I mean, a very silly example is in my classroom during the height of Black Lives Matter, there was then a lot of police violence in Nigeria, but my students couldn't comprehend it because they had a fixed model in their mind, which was white police, black victims. So the example of Nigeria to them was not conceivable. And that, to me, is an apolitical discourse, one which only understands power in particular places and eternally. So I think novelistic imagination gives you that possibility. But as you were speaking, I was thinking of, where are these readers going to come from? Like the identity of a reader is one that's important to me, and absolutely that analogy of the musician, of someone who picks up music and plays it. But since about 2000, because I didn't get a phone, I've never had one, one of the things that's the results of that is it's like a 20-year experiment. And the loneliness you feel in this world, if you're not part of that, is so intense, it's quite hard to describe. Like every train I get onto, every bus, everywhere I go, I look down the carriage and it's 100% capture. And it's so isolating. And I think when I've been writing about it, I've tried to, not from a position of judgment, because I was a reader on the train. I was the person ignoring reality. So I absolutely get it, the desire to be elsewhere and completely submerged and mediated entirely. But my question has always been, who are you being mediated by? And for me, to be mediated by Tolstoy is better than being mediated by Elon Musk. I prefer it, personally. But that argument is, an argument of 15 years ago. Now when I get on the train, what strikes me is that the commons, which is a place that has always existed in human history in which everybody is in the same reality, more or less, and the same time, more or less, does not exist now anywhere on Earth. And the most toxic part of it for me is children. So on that same British subway, when I was young, until quite recently, there would be noise. There would be a lot of noise, children misbehaving, talking too much, saying outrageous things, saying, look what she's wearing, shh, from the mother. Now silence, absolute silence on every bus, on every train, in every street. That emptying out of the commons is if you happen to be still walking in the commons, like my life, I live in 1992. So I really see it. I see it. And it's such a denuding of the public space. And it's so radical, I don't think you realize it when you're in it. It's like Mars right now, when I walk through the Earth. I don't recognize the planet. I don't recognize it. And everywhere I go, I've been to a tiny village, in the Gambia, and it's the same. It doesn't matter where you go. So that to me is a place to begin. Like I'm not a fantasist. I know not everybody's gonna throw their phone away, but I really hope that at least our people, our writers, our artists, stop making the argument, which they've been making for 15 years, oh, it's just a moral panic, it's the same as TV, it's the same as radio. That has been so destructive. And it's our people who have made that argument over and over and over again. And only now, as that generation has children, do they suddenly go, oh, wait a minute. But it's a little late for, 4 generations of kids who've had to live in this denuded commons. And that denuded commons also does not create readers. So I'm sure anybody with kids in this room knows that you can have a child read obsessively to about the age of 12, and then we're done. And if you're lucky and you have money and you're middle class and blah, 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 you can kind of bring them back at 15 or 16, but everybody else no. And my mother, who is a social worker, describes going into, a flat in our neighborhood. We have a lot of Somali families with 10, 11, 12 children. 30 years ago, she would have gone into a house like that, noise, chaos, discussion, now silence. The whole house is silent, every child is silent. Imagine what that is creating. And that, to me, the lack of a commons, a lack of even the escapism that I was completely guilty of throughout my childhood, it's been replaced with a new form of escapism, which is really deadly to human flourishing and human development, I think.
Can we talk about new forms and new language that can find people in these denuded commons, as you say, and as our notion of the human is changing?
Well, there's a novel I wanted to talk about, just very briefly, and because I think it is tempting as readers to go back. I know a lot of my friends, and I do too, I read novels from the past, and I love Carver, but it's important to me because the novel means new. It has to be new, that new forms are made. And there was a novel recently by the Hungarian-British writer David Shalley, probably pronouncing that wrong, called Flesh. And what was interesting about it is the main character is one of these denuded people. He does not have a 19th century soul full of feeling and emotion and interest in the world. He is, I think you've probably seen him all over Europe. He's an Eastern European guy. He might be on the door of the club. He might be working in a supermarket. He's quite big. He goes to the gym a lot. You don't know him. He's not your friend. That's the character. And the consciousness in the book is stark. He doesn't know himself. He has no interior life. He lives in his phone. You're not even sure how time is passing because it doesn't really pass for him. But halfway through the novel, he kind of accidentally, through his sexual activity, ends up marrying an extremely rich woman, one of the 1%. You only realize this because at a certain point in the novel, this woman's son, instead of getting a car to school, gets a helicopter. And you're like, oh, these are the uber rich. So the whole novel is told in a way that we're not familiar with, maybe that's not traditional. But I realized when I finished it, as I walked through my streets, I saw this guy. Suddenly I saw him for the first time on the door of the shop or working at the club, or I saw him, or driving the cab. I was like, oh, you're that guy. You've come from Eastern Europe, you're here. You're trying to make your way, you're in the gym 4 hours a day. So that empathy, it still worked. It worked. I felt it so strongly, but in no way was it the kind of humanistic, beautiful language of Russian novel, or even the kind of human model of Carver, which is so open and transcendent. It was new, but it still functioned. He had found a way to get through to me and to other readers who need a short sentence, need things to be very clear. Like I heard him say in an interview, you have to work with the bandwidth you have. Yeah. And the reader does not have this bandwidth for Tolstoy. So, okay, now what?
We need language, but we also need images. So when I read literature, when I read novels, when I read poetry, I try to get images, a different vision of the world. I want to quote Pope Francis again when he said he was talking to artists. You artists can dream new visions of the world. You see things deeply from afar, like sentinels squinting toward the horizon, probing beyond appearances. Your art acts as society's critical conscience, pulling back the veil of what is taken for granted. Like the biblical prophets, you show us what we'd rather ignore. You challenge false myth, new idols, banal discourses, traps of consumption, tricks of power. Artists leave in tension between reality and dream. So the artists are able to give to us new versions of the world. So they are able to give us new imagination. So I'm thinking about what he said, and I'm thinking about it, so I'm not sure about what I'm saying now. But I'm talking with artists, poets about this, and I think with people involved in geopolitics. And what I got from all these talks is that we play with just two images, two metaphors. And these images are the chessboard and the fabric. So our way of understanding the world has to choose between these big images, the chessboard and the fabric. These are more than metaphors, maybe. They are models of thought. The chessboard represents the logic of organized conflict, strategic calculation, division into sphere of influences. It's the paradigm that led to passioning like the one on Yalta. Pope Francis spoke many times about Yalta, and he really disliked what happened there. Pope Francis repeatedly criticized that model, which is the model of a chessboard, where people were treated like pieces on a diplomatic table, with peace built on power balances rather than mutual recognition. So it's the model, as he used to say, of slicing the pie. By contrast, he proposed the so-called spirit of Helsinki, referring to 1975 conference on security and cooperation in Europe, where 35 nations from East and West signed a pact grounded on dignity, equality, dialogue. So no partition, but participation, not hierarchy, but interweaving. And here the image of fabric takes on meaning as relational architecture to inhabit shared space, not through imposition, but through connection. For Francis, weaving is the paradigm of authentic communication. In a message he wrote, "We need passions, wading and weaving. And this way we recognize the thread of memory and return to dialogue with the fabric of life." I think this is crucial. It's an invitation to tell stories that connect, to mend what has been torn, to make visible what the algorithm tries to erase. So the common good cannot be built through decrees, dogmas, divisions, but is built through storytelling. It's not imposed, it's woven. This is why writers today bear a great responsibility, not to produce uplifting slogans, but to make space, to weave voice by voice, story by story. Stories, we know, don't remove pain, they inhabited it with awareness. They don't eliminate conflict, they walk through it. I think we have to rethink about our ability to imagine the world. And so reading novels means to rebaptize our imagination, not just for thinking about the world, but for finding solutions to our troubled lives.
I'm so grateful for your insights. I want to open it up for questions from the audience.
Thank you. Sadie?
Yes.
Hello.
Hey.
So you know I love your 2019 essay, Fascinated to Presume, which vindicated our rights, I don't know if this is the correct word, but our right as novelists to narrate the world from the point of view of another, across identities, racial, sexual, national. I was wondering if you have shifted from that position. How have your ideas changed in the last few years?
You know what? I hated writing it exactly for that reason, because it was a claim of rights. But I was so tired of the competition of everyone else's rights. Some part of me did think, well, I'm a writer, I have rights. And so I wrote a piece about the rights of us as a group. I'm glad I wrote it, but I wish I didn't have to defend what we do on the basis of rights. I think there's a better clue in the Gospels, actually. In the figure of Christ is suffering. And when I think about universality, that's the only, if you don't have faith, that is the basis on which you are operating, on the idea that human bodies have the potential of suffering and that death is coming. Those two things unite the humanist, the existentialist, the socialist, and the Christian. So that is the basis on which I think most of our writing depends. The ethics of it is this awareness that death is real and that pain happens. The last one is absolutely universal. The second one is partial. Not everybody experiences pain, but almost everybody. And that's the basis on which you build your characters, you think of the world. So Fascinated to Presume is a polemic, and I don't enjoy polemics personally. I try not to write them. But I felt in that moment where I can remember, I mean, writers I love and appreciate, but were taken up in arms against the very word human, you know, or the very word empathy. I felt that was a moment of extremity, and I felt a little bit embattled, and I wanted to try and defend the realm of the human, but also recognizing, as Pope Francis said, that it's a messy place. Mm-hmm. It's very messy, the attempt to make relations with anybody. But for me, when I'm defending writing, I don't want to defend it on the basis of rights or on the basis of a global idea. I think writing is local and particular in itself. And actually, the older I've got, the more I want my life to be local and particular. Like I really felt with my students, this sense of despair, because one of the things the algorithm persuades you is that the world's problems are your problems every day. And of course, if the world's problems are your problems, you can't do anything about it because you're 19 years old. So you feel completely defeated by 8 a.m. You're like, oh, well, I can't do anything with this, so how about skincare? So it really is built to defeat you. Whereas I think, just personally for my own mental health, I've tried to engage. I live back in my neighborhood. I'm back on the street I was born on. So I'm kind of living in a 19th century village kind of way. Everyone around me are people I've known my whole life. But it gave me a sense of agency. I can do something here. I can do something in my street, amongst my people. But of course, my people in my neighborhood are very varied. That my neighborhood is, hundreds of people from all over the world. So it's easy for me to say we, because I mean all of them. But I recognize that people live in monocultures, that people write novels from that kind of contained place of rights. What I want, and what I tried to say in that piece, is that opening yourself up to the experience and possibilities of others doesn't have to be an attack on you. You don't have to conceive of it as something that is coming for you. But I also am totally aware that this language of universalism has been multiply abused over hundreds of years. From the very first American statement, we the people, which didn't mean the people, it meant some of the people. And people like me were 3/5 of a person. So it's absolutely comprehensible that young people have nothing but suspicion for this language, because this language has been abused, both by creative writers, politicians, everybody. So part of the task is, and I don't think it's easy, is saying to them, there's a difference between an ideal and a practicality, and the ideal is still meaningful, but we have to show them that these ideals can be animated by reality, not just discourse. And that's hard. So I don't think my view has changed, but that is not a piece I would have written in any other circumstances, apart from feeling like I was in a closing box.
Thank you.
But may I say something about this?
Yeah.
Just very briefly. I'm very kept by the most relevant problem of the Catholic Church today, which is Catholicism, to be Catholic.
Yep.
Because being Catholic means to be united and diverse at the same time. So how to reconcile unity, so staying together, all together in the same boat, and diversity. I think this was one of the most relevant challenges Pope Francis faced, and this is why he organized synod. Last one was with 400 people from all over the world, from Papua New Guinea to the United States, South Africa, Mongolia, and El Salvador, and whatever. I never seen something like that. I was very proud to take part of it. But I learned a lot. The Pope Francis decided to build tables, putting people together. In my table, synodal table, there was the Archbishop of Moscow and the Archbishop of Kiev at the same table, together with the founder, the president of the folklore movements, who is Israeli citizen, but she is Palestinian. She's Arabic. And together with a nun from Iraq. So all this diversity, how can we keep together this Catholicity? No? And I was struck, and I'm going to finish now, but once I gave a talk in China, in Beijing, I was asked to give a talk. And it was a powerful experience to me. I spoke English, and I used the word universal. I saw some people saying, this way. So universal. At the end, so at some point I said universal, but what's the problem? Because I saw many people were not comfortable with this word. And it was an interesting answer. They said, we prefer not to use the word universal because it's a colonial.
Yeah.
Is a colonial adjective. We use very, very often universal, especially in the Catholic Church. They said we much prefer global, huh? Because when you speak universal, means that all the world has the same values that you have, and so you consider universal it's yours, just yours.
Yeah.
So let's speak differently. I learned the lesson.
Yeah, I'm always willing to give up that word if it stresses everybody out. But the thing, you have to find the basis for the human. And the basis is that we are death-facing. That is the universal aspect of our existence. And I think you're absolutely right. The biggest struggle is how do we create unity with diversity within it. And again, I just had the experience of growing up in my neighborhood, but it was watching that happen every day. It's not clean, it's not always perfect, but part of it is a discretion and a grace. So, in front of the gates of my kids' school, where you really do have 100 languages spoken, during something like COVID, you are aware at the gates that you are talking to parents who don't believe in vaccination, some parents who have beliefs very far from your own. Watching those people speak together, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, black people, white, they have a kind of caution. They know what to say and what not to say. They know where they can speak together and say, well, we all want to be safe. There's a basis here. We can agree on that. They approach those conversations with this delicacy. They're aware that they're a community. They're aware there are differences within the community, but they're able to speak to each other without it becoming purely a binary argument. And I think one of the things the algorithm encourages is a sense of this or this, nothing else. But actually human action is full of these ambivalences, full of these awareness that we can make a solid decision together about our children, whether they're going to school tomorrow, and we can also contain these deep differences about what vaccination is, what the government wants from us. All of that is contained within the same school. So I don't think it's impossible. I think it's happening on the ground all the time, but I don't think we have a language to express it. And I don't think we speak up enough for those kind of communities in which this messy, everyday, multi-faith solidarity actually does exist.
Do we have time for one more question? Yeah.
I've got the mic. I was going to posit a slightly counter-argument here, which is that I wonder whether this conversation is about talking to social media rather than talking about readers, because there's a fracturing of the canon, and maybe younger people don't read what we all read. But one of the things that the internet has possibly created is the idea that you might read an Argentinian horror writer like Mariana Vazquez, or you might read Percival Everett, who's been writing for 20 years and nobody read him until now. And that there is an idea of that word cancellation, which hasn't been used but has been implied. But in fact, every novel, even if you're reading, a novel about a middle-class, middle-aged white woman, as I am, is an act of reading about another life. I mean, a man writing a female character, and I don't see in the books being published or the books being read that there's a kind of stopping of readership. And one of the things I would also argue is I think it's miraculous that people still go out and buy books, still queue up to buy Sally Rooney. Okay.
Well, that was the example I was thinking of. Exactly, Sally is the example. The sales of those books are miraculous, and those books are transcendent. There's an idea of transcendence within them, and a religious idea within them, I think. But I don't think the readers would express it that way. I think they think those books are about, young women having sex. But I don't think they are about that. I think they're about human intimacy and the idea of a transcendent experience. And I think millions of people have responded to those books for that reason. And Sally is one of the reasons I often feel really excited about reading. I agree with you. But that's not the question. For me, it's more, how come we don't have a language to describe that experience or to defend that idea of reading and what it does? Why do we always flatten it? Because I think it is really exciting that so many people read Sally. Sorry, Mary, I interrupted you.
No, that was my sort of question. That's it.
So we've talked about the role of the writer to imagine the future and to offer strong images. And the reference has been to novelists and poets, but I teach Parul's work as literature. I teach Zaidie's work as literature. I regard Pankaj's work as literature, Naomi's work as literature. Is there, do the two of you think of well, why don't I begin with Zaidie, since you write both fiction and nonfiction? Do you think of this as a different act, or is the nonfiction writing that you do part of this conversation?
I love essays. I love all the essayists in this room, and I really enjoy writing essays. But I think just when I talk to readers, quite often, at least amongst the young readers I met, they would prefer to read an essay than a novel. I think novels contain more mystery. That's the best way I can put it. I think an essay is an argument, and a lot of people feel more comfortable with an argument because that's the kind of discourse they engage with all the time. And I love to engage in an argument, but when I'm reading a novel, I have a completely different feeling. And to me, it's deeper and more profound. I don't mean that novels are better than essays, or because most novels are bad, including mine. Novels are a really hard thing to write. It's always something wrong with it. Whereas an essay, you can really make an essay perfect. I think there's a clue there about the difference between essays and novels.
I think you can make an essay perfect, Zaidie. Wow. I don't know if the rest of us can. But I like that question a lot. And if I may just sort of respond to it too. I think that there is something very, very mysterious and open about the novel, and the reader does co-write the novel along with the writer, and we bring our own imagination to bear. We bring our own histories to bear, our own memory. And that feels incredibly special. And I do think the novel can hold oppositions, and it's a place for that. It's a place for kind of feelings and thoughts and notions that kind of can't go anywhere else can find a home in the novel. But that said, I see the essay as a form of literature that's important and interesting at this point? I do, because I think that especially where criticism is concerned, or the criticism that some of us in this room try to write, we work for the reader. The reader is the one that we care about. The reader is the person we love. And we want literature and books to be worthy of readers. And we want to keep literature tethered to material realities and to be as wise and as knowing and as complicated as the people that are expected to go out and buy those books. And so that for me feels like a very, very tricky, important, lovely form of servility on my part. I think we have 1 minute remaining. Do we have time? No, I'm so sorry. We'll continue these conversations. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much for your